Hi, I'm Jen Rogers at Nasdaq Market Site, and this is Breakthrough Economy. Today, we're diving into one of the most promising yet controversial sectors of the biotech industry, psychedelics. I'm joined by MindMed CEO Robert Barrow to talk about advances, misconceptions, and more. So, Robert, let's get right to it. I mean, there has been a cultural stigma around psychedelics for years. Looking back at the history, though, of psychedelics for medical treatment, when do you think that it started to gain steam and really start to reverse that bias?
Yeah, it's really been a function of two things, I think. One is the epidemiology of mental health disorders. We've seen an enormous growth over the past several decades and even more acutely over the past several years. The need and the awareness of the problem has only grown, and that's called for new treatments. It really, in the 2010s, we saw a number of research studies reemerging with the therapeutic potential of these molecules, beginning with psilocybin and LSD, looking at a variety of mental health disorders. So with that backdrop and with the modern developments in the past several years, we've just seen an explosion of interest in the field.
There are so many different diseases, diagnoses that people are looking at using these drugs to treat. So, anxiety, ADHD, autism, that's just a couple of them that start with A. So, can you tell us how psychedelics can treat such a wide range of diagnoses? Like, what in particular do you think is going to make it so effective?
So one of the things we see in the research is that these drugs target the most studied system in all of CNS, the serotonin system, but they work very differently than the drugs we have available today. They seem to drive almost a sort of reset, this enhancement of global brain connectivity. Your brain effectively talks to itself in new ways and allows new neural pathways to form. And that's what we believe is really driving this long-term change, because it's very rare for drugs in psychiatry in particular for an acute intervention to have many weeks or months, or even in some studies, up to a year or more of clinical response in anxiety and depression and these other mental health disorders. So that mechanism has to be something unique. And what we're seeing is really promising basic science research supporting the target engagement and the kind of functional activity that drives that longer term clinical benefit.
In this industry right now, there are some investors that are skeptical of it, mostly because I think of the associations people have with this class of drugs being illegal. So, how has the public, the stigma that they associate with psychedelics from the past, has that hindered progress? Or are we beyond that? Or do you feel that that's something that you need to be constantly addressing and managing?
It's certainly a unique backdrop. It's a drug class that has this storied history that you can't talk about the history of the United States in the 60s and 70s without, to some extent, talking about psychedelics. That said, what we are focused on is the therapeutic benefits of these molecules and using modern research standards to investigate the benefit risk profile. I think everyone should be skeptical. Everyone should be skeptical of any new drug, any new therapeutic intervention, and we should be extremely rigorous in how we approach the problem, how we conduct our research, and at the end of the day, arrive at scientific conclusions that can objectively support the safety and effectiveness of molecules. That's what our industry is about, and that's how we can ultimately help patients. So it's certainly a conversation that we have to have on an ongoing basis. But when we engage with providers and payers and patients, what they tell us is that there's just nothing in their arsenal that does the trick today. They have plenty of drugs, but in things like anxiety, ADHD, there are plenty of drugs, and some of them are effective, but for many patients, they aren't. And given the enormous growth in things like generalized anxiety disorder that we've seen over the past decades, there's a strong pull, a strong desire by everyone who looks at this objectively to see a new drug class come into being that can provide that kind of long-term benefit, really change the trajectory of how patients are cared for.
Can you explain the difference, I guess, between using the molecules as they are previously known versus adapting them and re-engineering them? Where does MindMed come down on that? Where do you see the industry overall? I mean, is everything basically new?
Yeah, again, a great question. We work on molecules that we think of as multi-generational. So some of the classic psychedelics, our MM120 program, our furthest along clinical program, coming up to a readout later this year, is a novel pharmaceutical form of LSD. But it is still, the active moiety in that compound is LSD. At the end of the day, it is that same old molecule. We certainly have earlier stage programs in the early research phases to look at analogs of LSD, analogs of other tryptamines and phenethylamines that could have novel activity, could have more selectivity for a particular target. Again, that research is so nascent. There's so much more to learn about what the appropriate targets are and what would drive the kind of therapeutic benefit. Where we've seen the most efficiency and really an acute opportunity is to bring these well-known classical psychedelic molecules forward as fast as we possibly can towards an approval.
Only the second company in the US to go public for psychedelic medicine. I mean, you really are a pioneer here in this space. So, can you talk about the opportunities being early presents for your company, as well as I imagine, sometimes there's challenges with being a first mover in a space where there's a lot of questions. How is that working out?
It's a great opportunity to shape the landscape. I think at the end of the day, we know a lot about these molecules. There's a long history. LSD has been over 10,000 patients in clinical trials alone. We have hundreds of patients and dozens of studies showing the therapeutic potential. And so connecting the vast need to the possibilities with this drug class is really what it's all about. That's how these drugs will be commercially successful, but commercial success is only driven by helping more and more patients. And so it gives us an opportunity to help shape how regulators think about the field, how payers and providers can ultimately take these molecules, if we ultimately get them approved and market them, and bring them into the treatment landscape. So I look at it as certainly a challenge, a set of challenges that are unique to the early movers, but it's really important that the early movers get it right. And we feel very fortunate to have a seat at that table.
As you look forward the next 5, 10 years, how do you think psychedelics will transform biotech? Are these tools that you think every company will have to have in some way? Are these scalable overall?
Well, certainly as we zoom forward into the future, step one is bringing these products to market, getting through clinical trials, through phase 3 clinical research, and submitting marketing applications and getting them in the hands of providers. But as we've seen novel treatment approaches like esketamines, Janssen's Spravato, intranasal esketamine that is now reaching almost $1 billion in annual sales. There's been really a sort of groundswell across the board where individuals and providers are saying, this is the next tool that I've been looking for. This is the next phase of psychiatric and mental health care in the United States, at least. And we think that presents an extraordinary opportunity. To scale it requires being forward thinking, to overcome some of these challenges and to engage with all of the stakeholders to make sure that when we get the drugs hopefully to the providers, that there's an infrastructure and an ability to then get them to patients and actually scale this in a meaningful way. But given the relative lack of innovative treatments in psychiatry over the past several decades, every provider we talk to is so enthusiastic about the potential and wants to see a new world, a new landscape where patients can be cared for with these molecules in their hands.
And in that new world, looking ahead, what is the biggest breakthrough that you think we could expect to see in psychedelics? Like, what gets you most excited about thinking, wow, this could actually happen and it would change everything?
Zooming into the future, the real opportunity is to change the trajectory of patients' mental health progression. We see early intervention often can really change someone's life. And if we can change someone's life early and for the patients who have had a mental health disorder for many years, can get them right on a better trajectory where there's sort of a feedback loop where they can live more fulfilled lives and have less of a burden of mental health, that can have vast ramifications, both in terms of medicine and ultimately how we're doing as a society, which is what we're ultimately trying to accomplish here.
Robert, thank you so much. It's so exciting to listen to you. I can't wait to get an update on how all of this is going. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.